Hello my friends, today marks exactly 1 year since the announcement of Sony A7IV, which means that it is a time to summarize the first year with Sony's latest hybrid full-frame camera. A7IV came into the market after a fairly long wait and with very high expectations. In this video we will take a look at how it fared against those expectations in the long term, and I will also talk about some characteristics and features of the A7IV that I haven't talked about before. My A7IV still looks as good as new after about 11 months of use, which is definitely a good sign. I haven't had any reliability issues whatsoever. It has encountered heavy rain twice during my year of use, but it also got through that with no damage whatsoever. One thing related to the build quality that I haven't talked about before is that the base A7 cameras don't have the rear magnesium plate, which is partially why it only weighs 650 grams, so I can't complain, but we will get back to that towards the end of the video. I was able to travel with the A7IV a little bit, so I have also taken advantage of the portability of the A7IV, which is still a big part of Sony's camera design. The A7IV is a completely new platform, including the sensor and the processor, so let's talk about that. The resolution of the new sensor is 33 megapixels, it is backside illuminated, and as far as the available information goes, it doesn't have a low-pass filter. Going with a 33 megapixel resolution was in my opinion a correct choice. It is a nice 30% resolution increase over the 24 megapixel sensor, and it distances the A7IV from lower end cameras and also from the competition. Some reports were suggesting that the noise at given ISO values is higher in comparison to A7 III, but that is not true. The structure of the noise is a little bit different, but the signal-to-noise ratio is pretty much the same after the downsampling. The dynamic range is also the same as with basically all recent Sony full-frame cameras, which means that it is fantastic. As long as you keep the ISO down, you can basically use the sliders without noise restrictions. I have talked a lot about that in the past, so I won't go deeper into that in this video. Instead, I will go deeper into the readout speed. The A7IV can shoot 6 frames per second with autofocus continuous in uncompressed RAW using mechanical shutter. If you are okay with compressed RAW, you can get 10 frames per second. These values are below average, there is no way around saying that, but it is not the whole story. It shoots 33 megapixel images at that speed, which is a lot higher resolution than with the competitors. I have greatly underestimated the power of the CFexpress card slot in the A7IV. First of all, it basically gives you an unlimited buffer regardless of the settings. There is basically no buffer clearing time if you use CFexpress. You can enter the playback menu immediately after you have shot hundreds of images with no delay. You can also change any setting without waiting. That, in combination with the autofocus, which is basically flawless, we will get to that later, actually makes the A7IV a very capable camera for shooting a lot of types of fast action. I have completely switched to CFexpress cards with A7IV. I only use SD cards if I really need backup writing. Regarding the autofocus, we have already established that this new system with 693 face detection points has absolutely no issues with my standard tests, including the low light, backlit subjects, focusing to minimum focus distance, and so on. I was finally able to properly test the tracking capabilities of the A7IV, and it did not disappoint. I got a 100% hit rate with a subject walking towards the camera in every single run, even at f2.8. During my 1 year of use, I haven't encountered a single situation where the autofocus didn't work perfectly. Smart features including the bird eye AF work great as well. One of the biggest practical improvements over the A7 III is actually the touch tracking, which works great. Another improvement over the A7 III is more options to set the drive speed and responsiveness in video. Overall, the autofocus on A7IV is fantastic and I have no complaints whatsoever. Regarding the in-body image stabilization, I do have some new interesting findings here. It is rated for 5.5 stops, but Sony is being much more realistic than other manufacturers. I have compared the in-body image stabilization in A7IV to Fujifilm X-H2S IBIS, which is rated at 7 stops. X-H2S IBIS is more effective, but definitely not by 1.5 stops. The in-body image stabilization in A7IV is simply very underrated. I was able to get sharp handheld images at about 1 second. In video, the difference in comparison to X-H2S is definitely not huge, which is certainly a good thing from Sony's perspective. Active mode offers additional stabilization with just 1.1 times crop that works great, and there is also gyro data stabilization. That is actually good enough even for walking shots with an ultra-wide lens. Overall, the stabilization in A7IV is a very pleasant surprise for me. Downsampled 7K to 4K video from A7IV is the most detailed video that I've ever got from any camera that I've ever tested. That still stands. I think that the fact that it can fully downsample 4K video from such a high resolution is a little bit underappreciated, so I would just like to give Sony a credit for that. On the other hand, 4K 60p has a 1.5 times crop. I still think that the image quality is surprisingly good. It is still downsampled from 4.6K and it is perfectly fine to mix it with full sensor 4K. I've also tried it with an anamorphic APS-C lens and that worked pretty well. I have played a little bit more with the S-Log 3 and I can say that I like it a lot. I haven't done any dynamic range measurements, but I found it to be very easy to expose and color grade. 10-bit 422 footage makes a huge difference in comparison with A7 III, where the S-Log was pretty much unusable. I'm also a huge fan of the classic PP8 and Cine 4 combination. That is a great compromise between the dynamic range and the ease of color grading. For example, it works great with my overhead hands-on scene, which is quite challenging due to the yellowish color of the background. Base ISO 125 is also a nice improvement. I've also found the codecs to be very editing friendly. For example, MacBook Air M2 can deal with all of the A7IV codecs with no issues at all. Especially the 140 megabits per second 10-bit 422 long GOP is a great compromise between the amount of information, the file size, and the processing power requirements. Also worth mentioning is the focus breathing compensation, which proved to be a game changer for those who shoot video with lenses such as 24mm GM, which exhibit a lot of focus breathing. Another improvement is that the internal display on A7IV will not turn off when you are recording video with an external monitor attached. The rolling shutter was also a topic after the announcement of the A7IV. There is some amount of the rolling shutter, but it is not a big deal. It is not visible in reasonable handheld shots at all. If you are shooting something specific, such as bullet trains or some fast action, it could be visible. Overall, I think that the A7IV is a great video camera. The handling is very similar to previous Sony full-frame cameras, so I don't have anything new to add there. It has 3 command dials, a joystick, plenty of logically positioned buttons, all of which are customizable, so I can't really complain about anything. The grip is also very well shaped in my opinion. Fujifilm has put nearly identical grip on their X-H2S, so I guess that they like it as well. The myth of bad Sony handling dating back to A7 II seems to be finally fading away 2 generations later. The new user interface has been around for about 2 years, and my long-term experiences with this UI are very positive. The function menu was really good even with older Sony cameras, and the addition of the touch controls has made it even better. It is very convenient for changing more advanced settings on the go. The main menu is, in my opinion, the best of all cameras on the market. It is very well structured, very logically optimized, and very easy to use. Sony went with a system of sub-menus, which is in my opinion a correct choice for complex cameras such as the A7IV or A7S III. The only complaint that I heard regarding the new menu is that the menu items are relatively small, which is a correct observation, but that is a price for easy orientation associated with the sub-menu system. The display was one of the 3 main criticized points of the A7IV. The resolution is 1.04 million dots, which is below average for this class. There is no way around saying that. In the real world, it is surprisingly fine to use. 3:2 aspect ratio is, in my opinion, a huge upgrade over 4:3 displays on older Sony cameras, since it weighs a lot less space with the black bars. The brightness and the color accuracy is also very solid. The amount of detail seems fine to me, so it is a lot better than I expected based on that 1 million dot resolution. I can't say that it is a great display, but I have found it to be a lot better than I expected. Yeah, it is a rotating screen, it is what it is. I think that I have talked about that more than enough in the past, but if anybody wonders whether I finally got used to it, the answer is no. I don't really have anything new to say about the electronic viewfinder. It is a very well known 3.68 million dot EVF with 0.78 times magnification, which is completely fine even by late 2022 standards. There definitely are more impressive EVFs out there, but those are in my opinion more of a luxury. The battery life is rated for 580 shots, which is relatively low for NP-FZ100 battery, but the practical battery life is very similar to A7 III with 720 shot rating. The battery life is generally very good, including 150 minutes of continuous 4K 25p 10-bit recording on a full charge. If we compare that to the competition, it is by far the best battery life of the current generation of hybrid full-frame cameras. Regarding the overheating, I actually did have some overheating issues during the summer. If I was shooting video for more than about 20 minutes at a room temperature about 27 degrees Celsius with no circulating air, it would show me the overheating indicator and then power off in another 5 to 10 minutes. If you set the power off temperature to high, it will keep going. Considering that it shoots fully downsampled full-frame 7K to 4K video, I can't really criticize it for that. One more thing that I haven't talked about before is that the in-camera microphone in A7 IV is actually very solid. Built-in microphones in cameras such as A7 IV are usually ignored and it probably won't be used for professional use, but for non-professional use such as vlogging or any kind of personal videos, it is in my opinion worth trying. I've also made a couple of comparison videos with the A7 IV. Probably the most interesting one is with the X-H2S because now we basically have a choice between the full frame and speed, since the X-H2S uses a stacked sensor. It can shoot 40 frames per second and it offers very serious video codecs. It is a more niche camera than the A7 IV, but still a very relevant option for some users. A comparison with the non-S X-H2 could be even more interesting, so I will do that as soon as my X-H2 arrives. I have also compared the A7 IV and A7 III. A7 III is now a legend and some people suggest that it is so good that upgrading to the A7 IV is not worth it, but I disagree with that. 30% resolution increase, autofocus improvements, better in-body image stabilization, new user interface, 4K 60p, 10-bit 422, CFexpress card slot and other upgrades put enough space between the A7 III and IV to make it a worthy upgrade. A7 III is still a very capable entry-level full-frame though. A7 IV versus A7R III is a rather simple one unless you really need those 9 extra megapixels. I would go with the A7 IV because you are getting a much more modern platform with better user interface, autofocus, vastly superior video specs and so on. A7 IV versus A7R4A is a bit more complicated because the difference in the resolution is very significant and the A7R4 is still an up-to-date platform, especially with that new A version display. A7 IV will probably be better for most hybrid users, but the A7 IV is still the king of pure full-frame stills image quality. To sum up, I think that Sony A7 IV has managed to stay on the top of the full-frame hybrid market during its first year. It indeed went over the period of the initial overcriticism much like any new camera, but it has proven to be a very capable package. Both stills and video output stay on the top of the class thanks to the new 33 megapixel sensor. The autofocus is pretty much perfect even in the most difficult situations. The in-body image stabilization is much better than you might think based on the specs and reputation. The new user interface is also a much needed upgrade. It is not quite perfect though. 6 or 10 frames per second continuous shooting is not great, but those are 33 megapixel stills and that CFexpress speed combined with the autofocus means that it isn't hopeless as a fast action camera. 4K 60p crop is what it is, it probably doesn't need more commentary. The display and the rolling shutter have proven to be not that big of a deal, so I guess that 2 out of those 4 controversial points are significant. Sony probably did have a chance to destroy the competition with 12 frames per second and no crop 4K 60p, but looking at the market a year later, I still think that it is the most capable full-frame hybrid camera on the market, which means that I can highly recommend it. So that's it for this video, thank you for watching, I hope that you liked this video and that you have found it to be useful. Stay tuned for more videos and maybe consider subscribing if you don't want to miss my future content. I appreciate your feedback in form of thumbs up or thumbs down. If you would like to ask anything or share opinion, please do so in the comment section and see you next time.